welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing another reading wrap-up type of video. I've read some books since my last one, and so I'm going to tell you guys what I thought of the ones that I've read recently. And I think it's been a couple months since I've done one of these, and so I have a decent amount of books saved up to talk about with you guys, and these are going to be in no particular order. So I'm just going to grab some from the pile and just start talking about them and kind of let you guys know what I think. Two of these books are going to be books from our book club, so I already have full reviews on those books, but I will just go into them very, very quickly if you guys for some reason didn't watch the book club wrap-ups, which I totally understand if you guys don't want spoilers and things like that. So I'll just talk about them really, really quickly to give you guys like a quick rundown of my thoughts. Plus, a couple of these books have ratings that have been changed, so I'll talk about that as well. So the first book I'm going to talk about is this one. This is at the top of the pile, and this is Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Now, this was my first Neil Gaiman book that I've ever read, and I tried actually reading this book, I would say 2 years ago or so, and I read like the first chapter and then I never really continued on with it. Not because I wasn't liking it, I just wasn't really in the mood for it. And then I picked it back up again, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book was such a cozy, I don't know, it was like a cozy atmospheric read, and I hate to use the word cozy because there's very scary like elements in this book, but even though this had some like really terrifying, weird, scary elements in it, it was still so cozy. So this is basically about this, I think, 7-year-old boy who lives in like this beautiful farmhouse, and just like the setting and the visuals in my mind are just so beautiful, and I think that's why I love this book, is because I have like the most beautiful imagery in my head when I think about it. But he lives in this beautiful farmhouse, and all of a sudden like really weird things start happening, and he meets this girl that lives kind of next door to his house, and she's from a family of kind of weird, interesting people. It never really goes into a lot of detail, but you can kind of assume and use your own imagination to kind of define what these, you know, people are, what this family is. I personally believe they're just like a family of witches, and they're basically trying to get this like monster thing to leave this little boy alone, and they're doing everything in their power to do that. And it's kind of like a magical realism, so it's kind of set in the real world, but it has really magical elements to it, and I just loved the vibe of this story. One of my favorite things about this story was actually the family of witches. I thought that they were so fun to read about. They had like a very cozy element, a very protective element, and I loved reading all the scenes where the little boy was spending time at their house. It was just so fun to read. The only thing about this book is that it is slightly open-ended, and I usually hate open-ended books. I love books that are very completed, kind of like fed to you. I like to know what the author was trying to do with their book, you know what I mean? And so usually I love a really good wrapped up ending, and I hate anything open-ended. And this book definitely doesn't have one of those clear-cut endings, but out of any open-ended book that I've ever read, this definitely is my favorite. I feel like it's wrapped up just enough to where you're getting enough information to kind of come to your own, you know, understanding of the whole situation. So I really liked this ending, even though it was open-ended, and that's really rare for me because I usually hate open-ended books. So I thought this was fantastic. I think it's beautifully written, and it makes me want to read more books by Neil Gaiman because I loved his writing, and I really want the girls to read this book. I think Elena and Emery would love this, and I loved the magical realism elements, and I just highly recommend it. So this next book has a little story behind it, and I had no knowledge of this book before I went into reading it. And it is called Crowning Design by Leila Mecham? I'm not really sure how to pronounce her last name. So when quarantine started, I was really upset because I was going to go to the library and I was going to check out a bunch of Christina Lauren because they just got the Honeymooners in and a bunch of other books, and I was really in the mood for like some good romantic contemporaries. And the library shut down, and I was just frustrated because I just wanted to check out a bunch of like romantic contemporaries. So I ended up going on to Book Outlet, and I was like, you know what, I'll just buy a couple on here. They're super duper cheap, and then they'll come and I'll be able to read them during quarantine, and I'll get my fix and they'll be really cheap, because I don't love buying romantic contemporary books, usually because they're quick reads. I only feel like I'm going to read them one time, so I totally don't mind checking them out at the library. So it's about a woman who is set to marry this man, and basically she doesn't really love this man. It's kind of like an arranged marriage from the South, and she's just not feeling it. You know, she went to college because she felt like she needed to go to college, but she ended up finding a major that she really liked, which was architecture, and she decides that she's not going to go through with this arranged marriage, and she is going to get a job at this architecture firm. So a few years pass, she becomes very successful in her architecture career, and then she ends up meeting this man, and she kind of has to figure out if her career is more important than, you know, a relationship. She's never really been in any serious relationships because her career is just so important to her. And then really crazy things start happening. People are trying to ruin her career and she doesn't know who's doing it. And it's kind of like this mystery. And one thing I can say about this book is the ending was really good. I really enjoyed how she wrapped this up. There was kind of 2 twists in this book, which I thought was good. And I thought she did a really good job at developing the characters to where you're questioning the characters, but it's not completely laid out for you. Like, she kind of confuses you a little bit, which I liked. Like, she plays with your ideas on who each character is a little bit, so it kind of confuses you by the end, so it makes the end really interesting. But the thing about this book that I was not expecting, and this was so weird going into this because I started reading it and I was like, Deborah is the main character's name. I'm like, who names their main character Deborah? I was like, that's just an odd choice. So I started reading and I realized that this book was written in the 80s. And that threw me for a loop because if you know me, you know that I despise the 80s. I just do not like that decade. I feel like nothing good came out of the 80s. I hate the aesthetic of the 80s, the style, just that vibe of the 80s is just not for me. And so when I started this, I was like, oh my god, this takes place in the 80s. And it's very, very much 80s. Like, because it's a contemporary, you're getting a lot of 80s references. Like, when she describes like what this hot guy is wearing, it's like a windbreaker. Just everything is just very much that decade. And if you like the 80s, that's great, but it just really threw me off and I just didn't like that element because I don't like the decade. It was really interesting too, actually, because this book was really pushing for like feminist ideas, which was interesting because it was an 80s representation of what feminist ideas are. It was very, very interesting and I kind of enjoyed reading that aspect of it because it was definitely outdated to a certain degree, but it was still interesting to read. I wouldn't say I hated this book. I definitely thought it was a fun, quick read. It's very short, so it didn't take me long to read. It was just different because I don't really read books from the 80s ever, and this was like the first, well, no, I'm not gonna say it was the first one. I used to read some Danielle Steele and those can be kind of similar. I gave this 3 stars, so 3 stars for me is usually like, oh, I'm glad I read it, like it was pretty good, glad I read it, but I wouldn't have like missed out on anything if I didn't, you know what I mean? So as you guys know, I read Crescent City by Sarah J Maas, or House of Earth and Blood, which I always call it Crescent City, but it's really House of Earth and Blood. I wanted to talk about this again because I actually changed my rating for this. So I had it at 5 stars, and I still will completely admit that I love this book. Like, I love the characters. I adored this book so much. But the reason why I lowered my rating to 4 stars instead of 5 is because I'm still really confused. Like I talked about in that main video about how I was really confused with kind of the twist and when it came out. Like, I feel like when a big reveal happens, you're supposed to be like, oh my gosh, like it all makes sense now. Like all the pieces like come together and you're just like mind blown. But with this book, I was more like, oh, okay. So like I was trying to like figure out how the pieces made sense and I just couldn't figure it out. And to this day, I still can't figure it out. Like the whole venom thing and how this drug affects humans and how it affects, you know, the non-humans and how it like releases the demons, and then like I'm still kind of confused by it. And I almost felt like I wanted to go back and reread everything again because I couldn't like put the pieces together. And to this day, I still can't really put the pieces together. Like I almost feel like I'm just trusting Sarah J Maas and saying, okay, I trust you that this makes sense, when it actually doesn't really make sense to me fully. And maybe it's just because I'm really slow. Maybe it does make sense, but I'm just not getting it. And that could be the case, but because of that, I had to lower it down to 4 stars. Like I like a book that when you get that big reveal, everything comes together, and with this it just didn't fully, and it's just kind of has bothered me since I've read this book. But I still adore it. I still adore Hunt and Bryce and Danica. I love Danica and I loved all the characters and I enjoyed it and everything like that. It was just that one thing that just kind of confused me. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about Shadows Between Us again. So this is the book we read for the book club last month, and I actually lowered this down to a 4 stars as well. I had it at 5 stars, but 4 stars still means that I really loved a book. So don't think that 4 stars means this isn't a good book, because I still really loved it. But I still couldn't get past the reveal. I just couldn't get past how it didn't make sense for me, and when that reveal happened, I was kind of like, what? Like, really? Like, that's the reveal? And I did feel slightly, I don't know, disappointed by it, which you don't want to be disappointed by a reveal. So that's why I lowered it down to 4 stars. Even though I really liked this book and it was just a good little quick getaway from my mind from this whole, you know, thing we're going through right now, that was just the one thing that just had to lower down my rating. Like, it's so easy for me to want to just give 5 stars out. Like, oh, I love this book, 5 stars. Oh, I love this book too, 5 stars. But once I like really think about it, it's like, like 4 stars is still really good, you know what I mean? So whatever, but yeah, 4 stars. So the next book I read, this is definitely a 5 stars, and I'm not gonna be changing my rating for this one. This book was so good, you guys. Like, I highly recommend this book. I feel like this book is so underrated for the book community. Like, not very many people have read this, and it surprises me because I absolutely love it, but it's probably because I love art, I love classic art, like old artists and stuff like that. Like, those types of things play a huge role in me and Travis's relationship, so I think I just have a connection to it in general, and that's probably why I love this book as much as I did, but it was really, really good. So it is Blood, Water, Paint by Jo McCulley, and this is about Artemisia Gentileschi. And if you don't know who that is, she's a famous classic painter, and she had a very, very interesting life. So she grew up apprenticing under her father to become a painter, but the thing about women back then is they would paint, but they would have to paint under like their father's name or their husband's name because they're women. And so she would paint these beautiful masterpieces but have to sign her dad's name. And one day her dad brings in a teacher, and this man ends up raping her, and she has a really, really hard time with it. And this is about kind of fighting for your rights as a woman and how important it is to believe women and things like that. It kind of goes into some stories from the Bible, like Judith and Susanna, which are 2 paintings that she did when she was a painter. And I don't know a ton about the Bible and all the Bible stories, but they were really interesting because it goes into those stories in this book, and it really relates to Artemisia's story. And so she has to decide if she's going to fight this rape or if she is going to stay silent, and it is so good, you guys. So obviously there's trigger warnings and stuff like that, but it was so good. And the thing about this book is it's written in verse, so it's really, really quick to get through. There's certain parts that are actually written normally, and it's the parts where her mother is telling her the stories of Judith and Susanna. But other than that, it's a really quick read, but it's so well done and so good. And if you guys didn't know my connection to Artemisia, so Travis loves old painters. His favorite painter is Caravaggio, and he's always told me how much he loves Artemisia Gentileschi's work. Well, when we were picking out names for the girls, Travis loved the name Artemisia, and he's like, I want to name one of the girls Artemisia. He just really loved that name, and I never was too keen on it because, you know, it's very, it's not an out there name, but it's quite a name, you know, and it's a powerful name. So we didn't end up using it, obviously, but after reading this book, I kind of regret not using her name because she was such a powerful, inspirational woman. And honestly, if we would have named one of their names, their middle names Artemisia, like Elena Artemisia, it would have fit Elena so well because Elena's such a little artist, and I think it would have been such a fitting name, but we just didn't use it. She's a very inspirational woman, so if you're looking for something like that, I highly recommend this. I think that this is a great, great, great read, and it's a quick read as well, so highly recommend it. It was very, very good. Next was kind of just a fun, random read. I actually found this at Goodwill. I probably wouldn't have read this if I wouldn't have found it at Goodwill, but this is called Mom Truths by Cat and Nat. Now, if you don't know who Cat and Nat are, they're actually a YouTube duo, and they do like mom truth videos, and I've been watching them for probably like 3 years. I've been watching them forever, and they wrote this book recently, and I always wanted to read it, but I was like, I don't really feel like buying it. I don't know. So I ended up finding it at Goodwill, and I was really excited to read it because I have been watching their videos for so long. And their brand is basically like the Scary Mommy brand, but YouTube. style. So if you know anything about Scary Mommy, most moms do know about that brand. It's kind of like the truths about motherhood and like the good, the bad, and the ugly, the funny stuff. That's kind of what they're known for. And honestly, this book was really funny. Cat and Nat are really, really funny, and I found myself laughing out loud a lot in this book. They're very honest and they're very raw, but they're really funny. Like these tabs that I tabbed in here are all parts that I actually laughed out loud with. They definitely start out at the beginning with like the baby phase and the pregnancy stage, and then they kind of get up into like the older age. And I think that this book would be a really fun book to get for a baby shower for like a mom, because the nice thing about this book is it really helps. I could see it really helping moms out when they get into really hard times. Because one thing that you're just not prepared for when you're a new mom is the hard times. When you're awake in the middle of the night for the 30th night in a row and you're so tired and you just need someone to relate to, or you want somebody to understand you, this would be a really good book to read because they just sympathize with you. And I think that if you were to get this book for a friend for her baby shower and be like, read this when times are hard, I think that they would like it because it just makes you feel less alone in some of those really difficult times as a mom. So I actually thought this was pretty good. Is it the most well-written book in the world? Of course not, but it's definitely written in their voice, like you can hear them talking when you're reading it. So the next book is a book that I got from the library, and it's called Doomsday by Katie Henry. I'll put it right here. This book I got because I just saw it at the library and I was like, sure, why not? So I picked it up, and the reason why I picked it up is because I thought the synopsis sounded really interesting. The thing about Katie Henry's books, she wrote Heretics Anonymous, which I also read, and the thing about her book specifically is I always think that synopsis sounds so good. I always think she has really good concepts for stories, and her stories always really intrigue me based on the like concept alone. And so the concept of this book is what drew me in, which was the same thing for Heretics Anonymous. But I actually gave this book 3 stars, just like I did Heretics Anonymous. There's something about her books that just don't quite grab me enough. So this book is basically about a girl who is terrified of the end of the world. She has like kind of obsessive compulsive disorder to a certain degree and anxiety, and she is terrified of the end of the world. She is a like doomsday prepper. She is extreme. Like she spends so much money on doomsday type stuff, and she goes to a therapist to kind of work through her fears, and her mom gets really frustrated with her, and it's just this really, really big part of who she is as a person. Well, one day she's leaving her therapist's office, and there's this redhead girl sitting in the office, and she's kind of saying like, I know you. And the main character's like, what? You know, like confused. But this redhead girl has visions of the end of the world. She knows that the end of the world is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. And this main character is in her visions. They're together at the end of the world, big doomsday thing, and they end up teaming up because the main character, I can't remember her name, you guys, I'm really sorry, but she believes her. And so she is helping this girl, and she's trying to get people to believe her because she believes her, and it's like this big mystery. Like, is the end of the world gonna happen? Like, are they gonna be together? Is this girl telling the truth? Or is she going to therapy because, you know, maybe she has like a mental illness? I don't know. It tackles a lot of really interesting concepts like mental illness, cultish ideologies, religion, the end of the world, all sorts of like really interesting topics. But it just didn't do it for me at the end, guys. Like, I wasn't too keen on the end. I felt like there were so many cool things that could have happened at the end, and I just didn't get what I was looking for. It felt a little anticlimactic for me, and it was kind of disappointing. Like, I was so excited to finish the book to see what was going to happen. It was one of those types of stories, but then once you get there, you're just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, it wasn't bad. It was just not what I was expecting or hoping for, I guess I should say. The redhead girl, the girl that knows the end of the world, she wasn't very nice, and she wasn't a very good friend. Like, the girl that was afraid of the end of the world was so supportive of her and was really trying to believe her and, you know, help spread her truth. But the redhead girl was just not very nice, and I just didn't really like that dynamic. And There's a romance in it that I wasn't too keen on, like I just didn't feel like it needed it. And there's just something about Katie Henry's writing style that just doesn't quite do it for me, but I still want to give Katie Henry a chance because her concepts are so good. I know that there's going to be a book that she writes one day that I'm really going to like, because I think that she has a really good idea of what would make a good story. The execution never quite does it for me with her. So the next book that I read was All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban. So this was an audiobook actually, and I thought this book sounded so interesting, you guys. Like, I was so excited to read this when I heard what the synopsis was because it just sounded so cool to me. So when I saw this on my library's audiobook list, I instantly got it and I instantly started reading it, and I was so excited. So this book is about this group of like high schoolers that are all working toward a scholarship. So they all have to go and meet up at this meeting thing. I'm not exactly sure like what it is. It's like a dinner luncheon type of thing. And they all go to this luncheon. And they're all sitting in there, and all these kids have like a connection with each other to a certain degree. So when they get there, the doors lock and they don't know what's going on. And on the lunch table, they see a syringe of poison and a letter. And the letter says that one person has to die by taking this poison, or you're all going to die by a bomb. So you have to pick one person to die. And so they basically have to spend this book deciding who's gonna die from the poison, or they're all gonna die from the bomb, basically. And I thought that was so interesting. I was like, oh my god, like who's gonna die? So that's basically the synopsis. Now, I gave this book 2 stars. I was so disappointed in this book, and it's not because I was like hyped up for this book or had high expectations. I honestly just didn't think this book was very well done. So in a book like this, there was a lot of flashback scenes, which I didn't really think about before I went into this book, but if you don't like flashback scenes, then you're probably not gonna like this, because in my opinion, I was really into